Canada's most famous UFO sighting. Falcon Lake, 1967. The Falcon Lake event in Manitoba, Canada, in May 1967 was investigated by the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCAF, Royal Canadian Air Force, and even the U.S. government came up to investigate. Stefan Michalak, an amateur geologist, was prospecting for quartz and silver in the woods of Falcon Lake, 150 kilometers east of Winnipeg, when he came upon two strange craft hovering with a reddish glow. He assumed these were experimental military aircraft. One descended and landed, and the other flew away. Stefan spent the next 30 minutes sketching it. After sketching it, he approached the craft, later recalling the warm air and smell of sulfur as he got closer, as well as a whirring sound of motors and a hissing of air, and could hear voices inside through an opening. Thinking they might need help, he called out, and when the voices stopped, he called out in different languages. He was close enough to look inside but did not see anyone, just a lot of colored lights. The hatch closed, and he touched the hull with his glove, which melted the fingertips of his glove. The craft then began to turn counterclockwise, and Stephen says he noticed a panel that contained a grid of holes. Shortly afterward, he was struck in the chest by a blast of air or gas that pushed him backward and set his shirt and cap ablaze. He ripped away the burning garments as the craft lifted off and flew away. Disoriented and nauseous, Stefan stumbled through the forest and vomited. He eventually made his way back to his motel room in Falcon Lake, then caught a bus back to Winnipeg. He was treated at a hospital for burns to his chest and stomach that later turned into raised sores on a grid-like pattern, and for weeks afterwards he suffered from diarrhea, headaches, blackouts, and weight loss. Items were later retrieved from the encounter site, including Stefan's glove and shirt and some tools, which were subjected to extensive analysis at an RCMP crime lab. No one could determine what caused the burns. At the landing site was a circle about 15 feet in diameter, devoid of the moss and vegetation growing in other areas of the same rock outcropping. Soil samples, along with samples of clothing, were tested and deemed to be highly radioactive, so were pieces of metal that were chipped out of cracks in the rock about a year after the incident. The metal had somehow been melted into the cracks. The U.S. and Canadian authorities' official conclusion was that this case was unexplained. Stefan held fast to the belief that these were not alien craft, but experimental military aircraft. The case is so famous due to the large amount of evidence from the sketch to the landing site, to the physical burns which remained as scars on his chest for the rest of his life, and the high amount of radioactivity found on the soil samples, clothing, and tools found at the landing site. To this day, typical moss and plants do not grow where the landing reportedly took place. Guy Kramer, an expert in air ionization with 44 patents to his name, with 41 of them in the field of physics, believes UFOs and UAPs utilize man-made ion propulsion technology, summarizes his take on what happened at Falcon Lake. To me, this event highlights a mission gone wrong. These government-developed and human-piloted craft did not know Stefan was there. They were far away from any expected people, and once they realized he was there and was looking in the hatch, took evasive action to have him move away so they could leave the area without further interaction. The sketch and description of flight characteristics, glowing red light when hovering, sounds, smells, and other parts of his description fit the bill of what I would suspect this technology to be available to the government in 1967. There is evidence that these exotic craft are capable of hypersonic speeds faster than 5 times the speed of sound, and maybe why the U.S. trails both Russia and China in development of hypersonic missiles. Why invest in developing hypersonic missiles when you already have craft that can fly and maneuver at those speeds to retain your secrecy? You would eventually make an effort to catch up with conventional hypersonic propulsion systems, as we have recently seen. It may be unsettling to think that we are in fact alone in the galaxy. It has only recently been discovered that all complex life on Earth share the same eukaryotic cells, and the original event only ever happened once. The critical event appears to have occurred about 2 billion years ago, when one simple cell somehow ended up inside another. Eukaryotic cells aggregate and cooperate to make everything from seaweed to sequoias, aardvarks to zebras, all complex multicellular life forms. That is to say, pretty much every living thing you can see around you and more besides are eukaryotes. Simple cell life such as bacteria and archaea microbes might actually be abundant throughout the universe, but complex life is now expected to be so rare from this finding that we are very likely alone in our galaxy and may also be alone in the universe, even though there are an estimated 2 trillion galaxies in the known universe. Guy has recently received 5 patents for a light-bending material, which can cause an object behind it to become invisible across numerous parts of the spectrum and even block thermal detection. Kramer asked the question, if these craft are so advanced, then why can't they make their craft invisible to us? I can already make ground targets and flying drones invisible with our patented light-bending material. It is only a matter of time before we make larger flying helicopters and aircraft invisible. You would think that aliens that can travel through the galaxy would be able to match and exceed our own technology, but these craft do not demonstrate this ability. On the contrary, they usually glow and can be picked up on visual and infrared optics and sensors. Why not imitate the lights on conventional aircraft? You still have a glowing hull or circles that could be red, green, blue, yellow, or other colors depending on the power output and atmospheric conditions. It would be difficult and unconvincing to try to look like a conventional aircraft with that glow. Guy further states, I believe that 99.9% plus of the military is completely unaware that this technology exists or that it could even be from their government. And in most cases, the visual evidence was gathered when they accidentally flew into an area that these exotic craft did not expect any conventional military allied aircraft to be flying. It is bound to happen a few times every year. The unique flight characteristics and lack of an apparent propulsion system would confound all attempts for military pilots and all their leaders to explain what they are, which causes the public to assume they are more advanced than we have the capabilities for. Many of these newer sightings are likely unmanned and remotely piloted due to the high-G maneuvers that are beyond what humans are capable of enduring. If aliens are visiting from other worlds, we should have easily picked up on their communications, but space is silent for those signals. We seem to be alone. The evidence shows complex life started just one time on Earth, and UFOs or UAPs are not what many want or expect them to be. Are these IFOs or IAPs, ion flying objects or ion anomalous phenomenon, a threat to the public? Likely only if one accidentally crashed into you, and they seem to operate away from populated areas to retain their secrecy. Whoever actually developed this complex technology did so in secret, and it happens to have ionization as a byproduct of this propulsion system. This geophysics mechanism is not well understood outside of the inner circle of people that have full access to these programs through minimal disinformation. The public and most scientists assume there must be abundant life throughout the universe, and these are evidence of that. Other world explanations. If people actually understood the vast distances between stars and the time it would take to travel between them by some advanced civilization, even at close to the speed of light and the factors that limit complex life, they may not be so inclined to believe in alien-operated craft. Kramer concludes, my issue is that so many people will view recent military-obtained evidence that has now been disclosed and believe we are being visited and or observed by aliens. That assumption can change your entire perspective on life. In this case, I'm referring to complex life, which is much rarer than science anticipated.